How's it going, everyone? I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Now that I finished talking about Can't Fear Your Own World story, I can finally talk about how it affects the universe of Bleach. So this video will be filling in the blanks left behind by the manga, and how this series transitions into the Howls from the Jaws of Hell arc. Not a long intro, but hey, if you've seen the previous video, you know what this is about. If for some reason you clicked on this video without having read Bleach's Can't Fear Your Own World light novel, don't worry, I have you covered. If you just want to know the premise without any major spoilers, I have a video telling you what it's about. If you're not interested in getting it and want to quickly hear the story, I have a video summarizing the main points of all 3 volumes. Both videos will be linked in the description down below. With all that out of the way, let's get right into it. Now, one of the biggest questions this light novel answered is what happened to the Rayo? You know, is he alive since the world isn't falling apart anymore, or did Squad Zero come up with an alternative method? So we learned that yes, the Soul King is for sure dead, and Yuha replaced him. So now that Yuha is the Soul King, what does that mean? Well, one of my old theories of him being in hell and his massive power caused it to overflow temporarily was wrong. Since that's the case, then what was up with his near resurrection at the end of the manga? What I think was happening there was that since Yuha became the Rayo, his fragments were scattered throughout the world. It was even stated in the light novel that now Yuha's fragments will cause a change in the world, similarly to the Rayo's fragments. The Rayo's fragments allowed humans to absorb a Hollow's energy when their mothers were attacked while they were still in the womb. It was stated the reason the mother was attacked in the first place was because the Hollow was drawn to the Rayo fragment's spiritual energy. The Hollow will then attack the mother in an attempt to consume the fragment, and if the mother, or at least the child, survived, then the fragment will take the Hollow energy they have absorbed and turn it into the ability to manipulate Reishi, which can then mature into a Fullbring. So the Rayo fragment is what gives Fullbringers their powers, and if enough fragments are collected, they can form a Hogyoku, which can allow Hollows and Soul Reapers to gain the other power, like the Visors and Arankars. So will Yuha's fragments work the same? I'm going to say no. The reason I think Yuha's fragments are going to be different first lies in how they both became the Soul King. The Rayo wasn't given much of a choice, but he didn't resist. He allowed himself to be forced in a state between life and death in order to create balance in the world, while Yuha was killed by Ichigo, and his soul was forcibly enshrined in the palace before he had a chance to resist. So the old Rayo's will was moving the world in a direction to preserve itself, while Yuha's will be moving it in a direction to break the balance and return it back to how it originally was. So instead of creating Fullbringers, Arankars, and Visors, Yuha's fragments will instead absorb its host's power in order to resurrect himself. Now, another reason I think that Yuha's fragments wouldn't work the same as the Rayo's would be the color of the fragments. The Rayo's fragments were white, and if I'm right, Yuha's are black. We may have seen them in the final chapter of the manga. You see, I was getting to the point. So what we see in the Sedete at the end was Yuha's fragments gathering and recreating his body. But then what happened? What did Kazui do that stopped his resurrection? At first I thought he shoved his soul back down to hell, but Yuha was not in hell. So the way I see it is that Kazui was collecting Yuha's fragments. The reason I think this is because in the last chapter of the manga, we see Kazui in a warehouse before, I believe it was, Hiyori Sarugaki scared him off. I believe he was in the warehouse looking for Yuha's fragments, and he eventually found it in what appeared to be his room. When he grabbed the fragment, his finger went inside of it. That could have happened because Yuha was resurrecting and all of his fragments were starting to become linked together. And when Kazui touched it, he connected to the link and absorbed all of the fragments that were trying to reform his body. Now, how does this work? Why was he able to simply absorb Yuha's fragments? Well, one reason could be that since they were simply a collection of fragments instead of the complete Yuha, it could have been simple for Kazui to absorb it, like sipping milk through a straw. Yuha went down smooth and without any clumps. Another reason could be Kazui's relationship to Ichigo. Now, this wasn't mentioned in the manga, but Ichigo was the most likely candidate to replace the Soul King. The fact that Ichigo has Soul Reaper, Hollow, and Quincy powers is not a coincidence. You see, the reason all of these powers could exist in one body without corrupting and destroying the individual is due to the Hogyoku, or the fragments of the Rayo, to be more precise. Like I stated, the Rayo fragments is what gave Fullbringers their powers, and Ichigo had the ability to use the Fullbring. It just wasn't his strongest ability. His Soul Reaper powers were his strongest asset that he trained and perfected alongside his Visored abilities. Just for reference, his Quincy abilities were the weakest due to the overwhelming presence of his Hollow energy. Now, all of these abilities were able to exist together because Ichigo has a Rayo fragment and possibly more than one. You see, the fact that his spiritual pressure was so massive from the get-go is more than enough proof of that. I mean, his sealed Zanpakuto was just as big as his body. Not even Kenpachi's or Yamamoto's Zanpakuto were that size. That simply means that Ichigo had the spiritual pressure, just not the experience to unleash it all. Now, here's something to think about. Yuha was enshrined as the new Rayo, and supposedly he was the Rayo's son. However, it was unclear whether he was the Rayo's biological son or accumulation of his fragments that created a child. So I'm going with the theory that he was compromised of fragments because Ichibe Hyosobe and Shunsui Kyoraku were actually discussing the possibility of him just being fragments of the previous Rayo who collected human souls and became his own being. Cause remember, when Yuha was born he couldn't see, feel, or hear. However, he would transfer a piece of his soul to whomever touched him, and heal any ailments or deformities they had. And when they died, the piece of his soul he gave to them would return along with their souls, granting him the ability to see, feel, hear, etc. Now, the way it's described, Yuha was a living corpse on the brink between life and death, similarly to the Rayo. So it could be possible that he was simply a part of the Rayo that gained its own individuality after absorbing a great number of human souls. So since we are working with the assumption that the Rayo fragments play a huge part in who can become the Soul King, and Yuha was enshrined after absorbing both of the Rayo's arms and then being slain by Ichigo, why was Ichigo the most likely candidate? I mean, he's going up against the Rayo's literal flesh and blood. What made him the superior candidate? Like I stated earlier, he had to have had a large quantity of fragments within him. These fragments were so large in quantity that they could have been enough to form a Hogyoku, which is why Ichigo gained visored abilities, as well as unlocking his Quincy abilities later on. That's what made him the superior candidate, because unlike Yuha, he had all three abilities of the Soul Reaper, Quincy, and Hollows, while Yuha only had Quincy abilities, as well as being a clump of the Rayo's fragments. Now, let's say when Kazui was born, Ichigo passed on some of his fragments to him. Also, technically, Orihime was a Fullbringer. She unlocked her ability after being around both Ichigo's makeshift Hogyoku and Rukia's legit Hogyoku, so she could have also passed on some fragments, but it's unlikely that she had multiple. But it doesn't change the fact that both of Kazui's parents had Rayo fragments within them that granted them unique abilities, so it's very likely that Kazui himself has a unique ability outside of his Soul Reaper powers. He must also have some type of Fullbring or even a visor power. His Fullbring could be tied to those giant fish eel looking things he rides on in the one shot, but nothing is concrete yet. Now, working with the idea that Kazui not only has the Rayo's fragments, but Yuha's as well, could tie back to his ability to open a gate to what seems to be hell, thus making him one of the antagonists of the new arc. If Kazui is only one of the antagonists, who could the others be? Let's take a sec to think about it. Who is in hell right now? Well, there is Yamamoto, Unohana, Ukitake, and not Tozen, because Aizen destroyed his Konbaku or his soul, so he's not down there. Oh. Tokinada had spiritual pressure equal to a captain, and he died 10 years ago. What are the chances he's down there right now? I'm not sure if they would have performed a ritual to send him to hell since he died after Ukitake, but on the off chance that he somehow managed to end up in hell instantly due to his corrupt nature, so the gates of hell claimed his soul the moment he died. Let's assume that is the case. Then Tokinada had 10 years to plot his revenge. And worse, make it so everyone in the Soul Society will suffer greatly. Good news is, he doesn't have Enrikyoten, so he's not that much of a threat in combat. But he has Yamamoto and the rest for combat. His role would work out better as the brains of the operation until he finds a way to get his hands on Enrikyoten again, but he doesn't have Aura to steal it for him this time. Also, Hikone is not on his side anymore, at least I hope they're not. Even if they are, Iko stole most of their fragments, so they lost a tremendous amount of spiritual energy, making them just as strong as an average Soul Reaper. Despite the 10-year time skip, it doesn't seem like Hikone had regained their previous strength, but it does seem like they have been training, so maybe they are strong enough to wield Iko without him taking over. Also, there's Aura, who may or may not be an Arankar. I would like to think that she is, and if she's not, she would have at least unlocked a Fullbring since she started to love Hikone like they were her own child. And the last thing she states in the light novel is that she would love to have Hikone eat a delicious meal that she would have prepared for them. So she now has a personal connection to something, so in theory, this should unlock her Fullbring ability. Now, what could that be? I honestly don't have a clue, since Fullbringers typically had a connection to an item and not a person. Well, she could have a connection to cooking, making it so she can create a space where she can cook meals to strengthen someone's abilities, improve their stamina, or straight up just heal them. So Tokinada would be on Hell's side while Hikone and Aura are on the opposing side. Whether it's going to be a situation of it's Hell versus the rest of the worlds like the Quincy's during the Soul King Protection War, or it's simply Hell versus the Soul Society, I still think Aura, Neliel, Tyr, and Grimmjow will back up the Soul Reapers mainly because of Ichigo, but for Hikone as well. I mean, Aura sees them as her child, and the others are familiar with them. I don't think they hate them, especially after what happened with Hisagi, so I do think they will support the Soul Reapers. Since I'm on the topic of light novel characters, there is also the 7 Kenpachi, Kuruyashiki, who was good friends with Sunsui and Ukitake. Based on the quick research I did on him, he and Sunsui would constantly hold drinking parties between their squads, so it should be interesting to see Sunsui go against his 2 closest friends. Now, Kuruyashiki's Shikai is described in Can't Fear Your Own World. It was mimicked by Tokinada's Enrikyoten, and they appeared as a giant white orb with massive chompers. Imagine Chompy from Mario but white and with no eyes. Kuruyashiki had the ability to create 5 of these, and they were fully sentient. They didn't need a command from him to attack, they can attack all on their own. That may sound incredibly terrifying to go against, but it's not that difficult to deal with. His Bankai, however, that's a different story. Apparently his Bankai will turn the ground into a giant mouth that will open up and swallow everything around it. People, buildings, that one little old lady who's always yelling about how loud the Soul Reapers are. You name it, it's all getting swallowed up. Really tempted to make a hen toy joke there, but, you know, I don't think that Granny would appreciate it. Granny does not approve of hen toys because it's a choking hazard for the little chicks. I'll see myself out. Okay, back to Kuroshiki's Bankai. It was so powerful that he was even recruited to join Squad 0, although he ended up turning it down because he believed his powers were more useful in helping with the 13 court guard squads, rather than hiding out in a palace waiting for someone to invade it. So if he was so powerful, how was he defeated? You see, his Bankai was so dangerous that it was forbidden for him to use it in the Serite. The person who killed him, the 8th Kenpachi, Soya Kenpachi Hazashiro, even admitted if the 7th had used his Bankai against him, he would have lost the fight. Speaking of Hazashiro, he could also make an appearance, just not in the same capacity as Kurosaki does, where you see Hazashiro is still alive. He's currently locked away in the deepest part of Mugen for attempting a coup d'etat and is apparently well acquainted with Aizen. So similarly to the Soul King Protection War, if things get really dire, since we may decide to call upon Aizen and maybe Hazashiro. If Hazashiro joins the fight, he could change the outcome, or you see his Bankai allows his body to merge with his surroundings, similarly to Aura's ability. However, Aura was still susceptible to Kido attacks, like when Tokinata used Yumichika Zanbakuto to absorb her Ryatsu. Hazashiro would be immune to such attacks because he would fuse with the world around him, allowing him to freely move around it. I guess the best way to describe it would be that it works in the same way that Lemillion's quirk in My Hero Academia does, only Hazashiro can merge with not just solid matter but also liquid and air. So instead of just passing through it, he becomes it and can even manipulate it. So I guess it would be more accurate to compare it to Zetsu's ability from Naruto, but his ability doesn't just merge his physical being with the world around him but also his senses, so he can see, hear, and feel everything his Bankai has merged with, and due to his enormous spiritual pressure, he was able to do this with the entirety of the Serite. He can even merge himself with another person to destroy them from the inside, which is how he killed Kurosaki. But this apparently leaves him vulnerable, so he would most likely fight while manipulating his surroundings to attack while turning his body into air to avoid being attacked. He can also apparently create clones of himself or just his limbs throughout the area he controls, so he can use high-level Kido in a large area. Now this all sounds stupidly broken, right? So how in the hell was he captured? So it appears that the Royal Guard got involved, and they had a way to counter his ability. It doesn't appear to be stated what that was, but it looks like it was effective because the moment they joined the fight, he apparently surrendered right away. I don't know if that's true, but that's what my research told me. Okay, wait, maybe someone can confirm this. I just saw on Reddit that Hazashiro escaped Mugen and ran into Kenpachi Zaraki and was killed. Is that true? Because if it is, he's probably in hell then. Oh my god, if that's the case, he could be the ultimate line of defense in hell. But he's been stated to be treacherous by nature, so maybe he goes against hell? Or even fights whoever is in charge to try and take control of it? So maybe at some point hell is winning the war, then Hazashiro betrays them in an attempt to take over. But Ichigo and the other Soul Reapers take advantage of this internal strife to turn everything around. I don't know, this is actually a really interesting concept. This whole time I thought he was alive, but if he's actually dead, that makes things really scary. Okay, let's quickly go over everything. So Yuha is the new Reo and his fragments are being controlled by Kazui, which allowed him to unlock a new ability which he's using to support the rulers of hell, which are probably Yamamoto, Tokinata, and or Hazashiro, who are preparing for a massive war with the Soul Reapers, which will draw in the Arankars and Aura. It's also possible that the surviving Quincy's could get roped into this war as well. Also, let's not forget Akone. They were compared to Ichigo a lot in Camp for Your Own World, so they may get a power up and return to their prime. That could be the turning point that the Soul Reapers need to win the war. Maybe Ichigo was forced to fight Kazui. Maybe Kazui had good intentions with causing this war, or he could have simply been manipulated into aiding the Hellions. Whatever the case, if it turns out Kazui wasn't somehow involved with Hell's uprising, I will be really disappointed. And that's going to be it for this one, folks. Just some interesting theories I thought about while reading Can't Fear Your Own World. Feel free to let me know what you think about it in the comment section down below. Even if it's just calling this theory stupid, it lets me know that people don't really agree with me, and that I should have let this theory bake in the oven a little more before putting it out there. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one, and remember to keep having fun. See ya!